All right, get this. We're diving into Yuval Noah Harari's Sapiens,
Oh, yeah?
a book. Uh, it's so jam-packed with these eye-opening ideas about, human history. You'll wonder how you ever lived without it.
It's true.
Yeah.
This book really makes you rethink everything you thought you knew about, well, our journey from, well, I mean, what were we? Glorified apes
Yeah.
to masters of the planet. It's quite a story.
And we're not shying away from the wild ride it's been, are we?
Not at all, no, no.
Trust me, by the end of this deep dive, you'll see the agricultural revolution in a whole new light. But first,
Oh, yeah.
let's rewind to the very beginning,
Okay.
to the dawn of Homo sapiens.
Right,
Most people don't realize that we weren't the only humans on the block back then.
right. We tend to think of ourselves as the main act, but our ancestors, I mean, they shared the stage with other human species like the Neanderthals, and get this, they actually had bigger brains than us. Makes you wonder what they would have accomplished if they hadn't, gone extinct.
Okay, so, bigger brains seems like a win-win, right? More processing power, more intelligence.
Yeah.
But Harari argues that those big brains came with a hefty price tag.
It's true. Our brains are like those fancy sports cars. Impressive to look at, but real gas guzzlers. They demand a huge amount of energy, which means our ancestors needed more calories just to function. And getting those calories meant spending more time hunting and gathering, which leaves less time for, well, everything else.
It's a trade-off evolution made, and one that might have contributed to the Neanderthals' downfall.
Wow. So our big brains might have actually outcompeted our Neanderthal cousins?
It's possible.
That's both fascinating and a little bit eerie.
Yeah.
And speaking of trade-offs, Harari points out another consequence of our evolving brains. Childbirth became riskier for women.
Exactly. As our ancestors were developing larger skulls, they were also adapting to walk upright. Now, evolution isn't exactly known for its elegance,
Right.
and this combination led to a tighter squeeze, so to speak.
Harari argues that this is one reason why human childbirth is so much riskier compared to other primates.
It's incredible to think about these early humans facing all these challenges, and yet here we are.
Right.
But as you pointed out earlier, they were just a blip on the radar for a long time. How did our species go from this underdog position to become the dominant force on the planet?
That's where Harari introduces one of the most mind-blowing ideas in the book, the power of myths. He argues that it was our unique ability to believe in shared stories, in things that don't actually exist in the physical world, that allowed us to cooperate in larger numbers than ever before.
Hold on, are you saying that things like nations, corporations, even money are basically just stories we tell ourselves?
Precisely.
Yeah.
He calls them imagined realities. Think about it. You can't physically touch a nation, can you? Or a corporation.
Well, no, those are concepts, ideas.
Exactly. But these ideas have incredible power because we've collectively agreed to believe in them. Take the Peugeot company, for example. It's not something you can see or touch, but it can own property, pay taxes, even sue or be sued in court.
Right.
How is that possible? Because we've all bought into this story, this shared fiction.
So in a way, we've created this powerful illusion that allows us to organize ourselves on a massive scale. We went from small bands of hunter-gatherers to villages, cities, empires, and eventually to the globally interconnected world we live in today.
It's a truly remarkable feat when you think about it. We've gone from those insignificant apes with big, energy-hungry brains to masters of our own narratives, shaping reality with our collective imagination.
It's enough to make your head spin.
It is.
But before we get too lost in the wonder of it all, let's move on to what many consider humanity's next big leap forward, the agricultural revolution. But, and I can't believe I'm saying this, Harari dares to call it, get this, history's biggest fraud.
I know,
A
right?
fraud? Where do I even begin with that?
I know it sounds crazy at first, doesn't it? We're taught to think of agriculture as this huge advancement, the dawn of civilization as we know it.
Right.
And in some ways it was. It allowed us to produce more food, to settle in one place, and ultimately to support larger populations. But, and this is the crucial part, Harari argues that for many individuals, the shift to agriculture actually decreased their quality of life.
Wait, really? I'm having trouble wrapping my head around that. How could it be worse than the uncertainty of hunting and gathering?
Well, think about it. Hunter-gatherers had a varied diet, moving with the seasons, eating whatever nature provided. Farmers, on the other hand, became dependent on a small number of crops, often just wheat or rice. If the harvest failed, they were in big trouble.
So less dietary variety, more vulnerability to famine. What else?
Well, Farming is hard work. It's physically demanding, time-consuming, and requires a completely different kind of lifestyle. Hunter-gatherers, for all their challenges, had more free time and weren't constantly tied to one place.
Right.
So,
It's like we traded freedom and flexibility for security and stability, and it's not even clear if we got a good deal. And you mentioned earlier that disease became a bigger problem with agriculture.
absolutely. Living in larger, denser settlements, it created perfect breeding grounds for disease. Plus, sanitation wasn't exactly a top priority back then. So while agriculture did lead to many advancements, it also came with a whole new set of problems.
It really makes you wonder, if life was arguably better for our hunter-gatherer ancestors, why on earth would they make the switch to farming in the first place?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And there are a lot of theories, but no definitive answer. Harari suggests that it happened gradually, almost accidentally. Imagine those early farmers just trying to supplement their diets, not realizing they were stepping onto a path that would ultimately change the course of human history.
It's kind of like that old saying, how do you boil a frog?
Right.
You do it slowly so it doesn't realize what's happening until it's too late.
Exactly. And here we are, thousands of years later, still grappling with the consequences of that fateful transition. Speaking of consequences, the rise of agriculture led to another major shift, the emergence of cities, and, with them, the rise of empires.
And this is where those imagined realities we talked about really start to take shape in complex ways. Laws, social hierarchies, even grand narratives about the gods, all designed to maintain order and justify the power structures of these new large-scale societies.
You're right, and Harari uses a fascinating example to illustrate this. Hammurabi's Code from ancient Babylon.
Hammurabi's Code.
Yeah, it was one of the earliest known sets of written laws, and it's incredibly revealing about how these early empires function.
Okay, so tell me more about Hammurabi's Code. What kind of laws did it lay down?
Well, imagine a society where the punishment for a crime could vary dramatically depending on your social status.
Whoa, seriously. So different rules for different folks.
Exactly. For example, if a commoner broke the bone of a nobleman, their own bone would be broken in return. But if they broke the bone of another commoner, they'd just have to pay a fine.
Wow. Talk about a two-tiered justice system.
Uh,
That's a far cry from our modern ideals of equality before the law.
Precisely. And Harari uses Hammurabi's Code to show that even those documents we view as blueprints for equality, like the American Declaration of Independence, are, at their core, imagined orders. They rely on shared values and beliefs that aren't necessarily objective truths.
Okay, so we're back to the power of those shared narratives.
Right.
They really are the bedrock of civilization, aren't they?
Seems like it, yeah.
But as you said, those hierarchies, those imagined orders, often came at a cost, especially for those at the bottom of the pile.
Absolutely. And Harari doesn't shy away from the darker side of these systems. He reminds us that these imagined hierarchies have been used to justify discrimination and oppression throughout history, from ancient caste systems to modern racial prejudice.
Yeah. It's a sobering reminder that progress isn't always linear, is it? For every step forward, there can be unintended consequences, hidden costs.
That's precisely what makes studying history so important. It allows us to learn from the past, to see those patterns, and hopefully to create a better future. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's get back to those turning points in Harari's narrative. We've talked about agriculture, empires, and their complex social structures. What comes next?
Well, you can't have an empire without a way to manage all that wealth and information, right?
That's very true, yeah.
And that's where things get really interesting. We're talking about the invention of writing and the rise of bureaucracy.
Yes. Suddenly you've got taxes to collect, laws to enforce, armies to supply spreadsheets of grain and chariots.
Yeah.
You can't just rely on memory and word of mouth anymore. You need a system, and that system is bureaucracy,
Yeah.
built on a backbone of written language.
Right. It's like going from a small business to a multinational corporation, right?
Right.
You need records, you need reports, you need standardized procedures. But wasn't early writing mostly about record keeping? Not exactly Shakespeare.
Right, you're spot on.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it as the early versions of spreadsheets and invoices.
Oh.
The ancient Sumerians, for example, they developed cuneiform script to keep track of their grain stores, not to pen love poems.
Right.
And the Incas used a system of knotted cords called quipus to record census data and other important information.
It's incredible to think how these early practical systems evolved into the complex writing systems we use today.
It's amazing.
But Harari argues that learning to read and write didn't just give us a way to store information, it actually changed the way our brains work.
That's right. It's like upgrading your computer's operating system.
Yeah, okay.
Suddenly, you can process information differently, categorize it, organize it linearly. We became more efficient, more systematic in our thinking.
Which makes sense if you're trying to manage a complex empire, right?
Right.
But did it make us any better at, say, composing epic poetry or pondering the mysteries of the universe?
That's a great question, and one that philosophers have been debating for centuries.
Right.
But Harari's main point is that literacy, while having its downsides, was essential for large-scale human cooperation. It allowed us to share knowledge, to build on each other's ideas, and ultimately to create the complex societies we live in today.
Okay, so we've got agriculture, empires, writing, bureaucracy. What's the next big game changer in the story of Homo sapiens?
Well, no empire can function for long without a reliable system for managing its wealth.
Right.
And that, my friend, brings us to another one of those imagined realities we talked about earlier, money.
Money, the lifeblood of modern society. But it's just, what, pieces of paper? Or nowadays, ones and zeros on a screen. What makes it so powerful?
It all boils down to trust.
Not for us.
Yeah, money in its essence is simply a system of mutual trust. We agree to believe that these tokens, whether they're shells, coins, paper, or digital bits, have value, even though that value is ultimately imaginary.
It's like a collective hallucination that we've all decided to buy into.
Kind of, yeah.
And surprisingly, it works.
It does. Money allows us to trade with strangers, to store value, to build complex economies. But as with any powerful tool, there are downsides.
Oh, tell me about it. Money can be a source of corruption, inequality, even violence. Just look at history. Wars have been fought, empires have crumbled all over money.
Exactly. And Harari doesn't sugarcoat these aspects. He takes us through the evolution of money, from bartering to coinage to paper money to the sophisticated financial systems we have today, highlighting both its benefits and its potential for causing chaos.
And those downsides really come into sharp focus with the rise of capitalism, don't they? Harari argues that what started as a system for trade and production has ballooned into an all-encompassing worldview.
He calls it the capitalist creed, and he argues that it's come to influence not just our economies, but our ethics, our values, even our personal relationships.
It's like capitalism has become the new religion, with the pursuit of profit as its highest commandment.
Yeah, that's a powerful analogy. And Harari argues that this capitalist creed is so pervasive, so ingrained in our thinking, that we often don't even question his assumptions anymore.
Which brings us to another major turning point, the Industrial Revolution. This is where we really start to see those unintended consequences of our actions playing out on a global scale.
Absolutely. The Industrial Revolution, fueled by fossil fuels and driven by technological innovation, unleashed an unprecedented increase in human power and productivity.
And let's not forget the impact on the planet. We're talking pollution, climate change, deforestation, all driven by this insatiable need for more.
You're right. The Industrial Revolution led to an explosion in consumption, and that's had a profound impact on the natural world.
Yeah.
And as Harari points out, it's also had a significant impact on our relationship with animals.
That's right. Harari talks about the ethical implications of industrial agriculture.
Yeah.
How we've essentially turned sentient beings into cogs in a machine, prioritizing their objective needs over their subjective well-being.
He uses those rather unsettling experiments with Harry Harlow's monkeys to illustrate this point.
Oh, right. Those were the experiments where they separated baby monkeys from their mothers.
Yeah.
And raised them with surrogate mothers made of wire and cloth, right?
Exactly. And what Harlow found was that these monkeys, even though their physical needs were met,
Right.
suffered severe psychological distress. They craved social interaction, comfort, and affection, all the things that were denied to them in the name of science.
And the parallel to industrial agriculture is pretty clear, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
We provide animals with food, water, and shelter, but often in cramped, unnatural conditions where they can't engage in their natural behaviors.
Exactly. It's a classic example of how our pursuit of progress, in this case, greater efficiency in food production, can come at a steep ethical cost.
It's definitely something to think about the next time we're at the grocery store faced with all those rows and rows of neatly packaged meat.
Yeah.
But the Industrial Revolution wasn't just about food production, was it?
No, it was about a fundamental reshaping of society. It led to mass urbanization, the rise of the factory system, and with it, a whole new set of social problems.
Like what were some of the social consequences of this massive shift?
Well, for one, you had millions of people moving from rural areas to crowded cities in search of work. And this massive migration, well, it led to new problems.
Okay.
Poverty, crime, social unrest. It was a time of great upheaval and change.
And amidst all this change, a new imagined order began to take hold.
Yeah.
One that encouraged people to find solace, even happiness, in material goods.
Oh, yeah.
Consumerism.
Exactly. As factories turned out more and more products, people were bombarded with advertising messages telling them they needed the latest gadgets, the newest fashions, to be happy. And of course, this insatiable appetite for more is still driving our economy and shaping our desires today.
It's both fascinating and a little terrifying how these forces, set in motion centuries ago, continue to shape our world today. But speaking of shaping our world, let's talk about the future. Harari doesn't shy away from speculating about where we're headed as a species.
It certainly doesn't. And things get pretty mind-blowing pretty quickly.
For instance, what kind of future scenarios does he paint?
Well, Harari argues that we're entering an era where we have the potential to transcend our biological limitations, to
Okay.
become something more than human through bioengineering, artificial intelligence, and other emerging technologies.
Okay, now we're talking. This is where Sapiens really lives up to its hype. So give me the highlights. What's in store for humanity?
Well, Harari points out that we've been manipulating biology for centuries,
Right.
through selective breeding, for example.
Yeah.
But what's different now is the scale and precision with which we can alter life at the genetic level.
Wow.
We're talking about engineering disease resistance,
Hmm.
enhancing physical and cognitive abilities, even potentially extending our lifespans.
It's like something out of a science fiction novel. But it's happening right now, in labs around the world. It's both exciting and a little bit terrifying, wouldn't you say?
It certainly raises profound ethical questions. For example, what happens when we can create bionic limbs that are stronger, faster, and more durable than natural limbs? Will these enhancements be available to everyone? Or will they further widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots?
It's easy to imagine a future where the wealthy can literally buy themselves a competitive edge. Physically, mentally, maybe even in terms of lifespan. That's straight out of a dystopian sci-fi thriller.
And that's precisely what worries Harari. He sees the potential for these technologies to exacerbate existing inequalities, creating a world where some humans are, in a very real sense, more equal than others.
It's a chilling thought, but a crucial one to consider. So what can we do? Is there any way to steer clear of these potential pitfalls?
Harari doesn't claim to have all the answers.
Right.
He's a historian, not a fortune teller. But he does urge us to think critically about the choices we're making today, to consider the long-term consequences of our actions.
It's a call to action, isn't it? We can't just sit back and let the future happen to us. We need to shape it consciously and ethically.
Exactly. And that's where Harari brings us full circle back to the power of stories. He argues that we need new stories, new myths, to guide us in this brave new world. Stories that emphasize cooperation, compassion, and our shared humanity.
Because at the end of the day, even with all our technological prowess, we're still those vulnerable, interconnected apes who just want to make sense of the world and find our place in it.
Beautifully put. And it brings us to Harari's final thought-provoking question. Can humanity learn from its past mistakes and create a future where our immense power is used not just for our own survival, but for the well-being of all beings on this planet?
It's a question that deserves our deepest consideration. And perhaps, just perhaps, if we grapple with it honestly, if we embrace our shared humanity, we can write a new chapter in the story of Homo sapiens. One that's marked by wisdom, compassion, and a deep respect for all life.
Now that's a hopeful note to end on.
It is, but it's not just about hope, is it? It's about acknowledging the power we have to shape the future and taking responsibility for the choices we make today. Well, folks, there you have it. A whirlwind tour through the history and potential future of humankind.
And hopefully plenty of food for thought as you continue your own exploration of these big questions.
Until next time, keep asking those tough questions, keep diving deep, and most importantly, keep those imaginations firing. We'll see you in the next episode.